Old Black Hollywood would like to welcome with us today Michelle Y. Green, who is an award-winning author of historian books for children and young adults. And right now, she's currently working on a book about Oscar Micheaux. And I'm so excited for her to be on our show because I love learning about Oscar Micheaux. I love talking to people who knows a lot about him as well. And Michelle Y. Green knows a lot because she's an expert. And in fact, she has gone to his festivals too. There is a Oscar Micheaux festival, which we'll discuss later in this whole show. So Michelle Y. Green, can you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Thank you, Claire. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Michelle Y. Green. I am an award-winning author. I have been writing since I was like 5 years old. I lived in Germany. My dad is a Tuskegee Airman, and when we lived in Germany, my teacher sent me a report card that said Michelle is destined to become a writer, and that prophecy was true. So I've been writing more years than I'd care to admit. But in terms of Oscar Micheaux, let me tell you the story of how it all began. I had just published a book. My most recent book is called A Strong Right Arm, the story of Mamie Peanut Johnson. And by the way, it has just made the teacher's pick on Amazon. So
Congratulations.
thank you. Yes, that was a real surprise, but what I like to do is create stories that are authentic. They are carefully researched. They are about the hidden gems of history that people don't really know too much about. And so I had just published the book, had published A Strong Right Arm, and my publisher, she called me and said, "Have you ever heard of Oscar Micheaux?" And this was like, I don't know, 20 years ago. I said, "No, I have never heard of him." And she said, "Well, he was the earliest Black filmmaker." And I said, "This is something I need to know more about." So she asked me if I would accept the commission. And I said, "Of course I would." So that's how it started. It actually has gone under two different publishers now. The first one was Penguin Putnam. And now, most recently, it has been completely rewritten. And our current publisher is my current publisher is Just Us Books. Cheryl and Wade Hudson. In fact, they're from New Jersey as well.
Oh, all right.
I encourage you to visit their website. They are an amazing publisher,
Okay.
justus.com. So, I do a lot of research. I research. Uh, a lot of people think that research is boring, but I love research. And I feel that people should really stay hands on and not just, well, back then we didn't even have Google, but now people tend to go on Google. They use AI, but I'm the kind of person that likes to go hands on with my research. So we found out that there was, before the Oscar Micheaux Film Festival in LA, there was a little town called Gregory, South Dakota, and they had an Oscar Micheaux Film and Book Festival. My son Brian, who wrote the foreword of Oscar Micheaux, and by the way, the working title is Lights, Camera, Action, the story of Oscar Micheaux.
All right.
So it's changed. So we traveled to South Dakota together. Brian is an independent filmmaker. And we like to say that you could put your car on cruise control for about 3 hours straight down the road because there was nothing to the either side of you. And we were just like, I mean, the speed was 70 miles an hour, but it was just straight, nothing to the left, nothing to the right. So what we did is we flew into Sioux City and got a rental car and then just drove straight through and
Mhm.
got into the little town. We didn't know what to expect. So we got into our lodge, and what I remember were there were big. it was pheasant company, pheasant country. So they
Mhm.
had people were hunting, and so they had like deer heads and all kinds of heads hanging on the wall. We're like, we're city folk, and we're like, what the heck is this? So the festival started the next day, and oh, I know who you were talking about is Pearl Bowser. Pearl Bowser is the historian. She is an Oscar Micheaux expert, and she did pass. She passed last month.
Right.
Pearl Bowser, amazing woman, and we got to meet her several times. She was so,
Wow.
yeah. You should look up her
I
information as
will.
well.
I
Look up
definitely
her on
will.
Wikipedia. Excuse me. So the festival was like 3 days long. They had a get a sip of water. They would screen original Oscar Micheaux movies, some of his
Really?
earliest movies. They had a replica of his homestead on the very land that Oscar farmed. So we could go on tours up to the homestead and see the land where he actually had his soddy. Excuse me. So the part that I remember most, Richard Papusek, he was one of the people that helped us with the research, and Jerry Wilski had created an Oscar Micheaux center, which was amazing. He had pictures on the wall. He had conference rooms where we could go in and talk with one another. We heard presentations, there were screenings. We went up to the Saudi, and what I remember most was they said that when he first built it, it was just like a thatched, it was a house made of sod.
Mhm.
And he would be there all alone. And he could hear at night, he could hear the snakes coming down from on top of the wall. It just kind of day
Wow.
in. Yes. And
Snakes. Ugh.
yeah, I know. It was amazing. And he actually started out, his parents were descendants of his grandparents were descendants of slaves,
Yes.
the Huguenots. And so after that happened, his family moved out to um, a little town in Illinois, and they became farmers. But Oscar did not like to farm. He had the gift of gab. He was kind of odd. So his father said he has a gift of gab. So what they did is they put him in charge of marketing the goods. So the he was uh, they would take the goods to market, and they said that Oscar could just talk a blue streak and convince all the women to come and buy their goods, and that's how he prospered. But Oscar knew from the very beginning he wanted more than that out of life. So after a while, he left the family and went to Chicago to be with his brother, and people just thought he was just really odd. He just didn't fit in anywhere, but he was very well educated. And so after a while, he did a lot of odd jobs. He shined shoes. He worked in they had mines. He did anything that he could do to get a little bit of money. And then he found out about the Pullman porters. So he became a Pullman porter and rode on the trains. And from the people on the train, the wealthy people, he listened, and he learned about the fact that they were opening up land, Indian land, near the Rosebud, what had been formerly the Rosebud uh, Nation, where the Native Americans lived at that time. So the Homestead Act had just passed, and Oscar said he knew that how valuable it was to own land. So he went through the entire process. He failed several times, but he finally got a plot of land near Gregory, South Dakota. And he was such an entrepreneur. I mean, he was not just a filmmaker. He wrote, he made 35 independent films. He wrote 7 books. So he was a publisher, a writer, a publisher, a marketer, a producer. And at that time, that was just simply unheard of. Even people like Spike Lee and John Townsend and some of the current Singleton and some of the current filmmakers, they credit their gift and their love. Even Maya Angelou was a filmmaker, believe it or not.
Now,
And
Michelle, with all
uh-huh.
that you're saying about Micheaux, what actually made you have the desire to really want to learn more about him, to research him further?
I'm just curious. Anytime I feel that there's something I don't know, I like to take things apart and put them back together. That's the beauty of the research. And I think for writers, it's important to be curious and not just, take things at their word. It's important if you're writing, especially historical fiction
Hmm.
or biography, which has a possibility of being used as textbooks or references, you've got to be really thorough in your research. So it just piqued my interest. So going back to the festival, we went to that little town 3 years straight.
Wow, you are
Yes,
dedicated,
and one
very
time I was
dedicated.
even a presenter, and yeah, we
Oh,
talked to people from the land. We talked to some of the Native Americans who were there. We ate the prairie food. They had this they would cook. They take a wheelbarrow and line it with plastic and make a stew in the wheelbarrow.
wow.
So we really got immersed in the culture there. And one of the things that I remember that just was astonishing, I like to get down on the soil, smell the earth, look at the creatures that are there. And I remember that I was face down and just kind of feeling the soil that author Oscar had to plow and break. I
And he
went there
complained
very,
about, he complained
yes,
about because he
I
didn't like
complained
doing it.
about, and I went there very early in the morning, and there were
Mhm.
beautiful sunflowers. And the sunflowers, and I didn't know this, in the morning, they put their faces up to the sun. And then as the day, turns, the faces of the sunflowers turn toward the sun.
Mm,
So, and see, again, that's something you can't Google. You have to experience that.
experience that.
So, there's a chapter that I wrote. It's mentioned in one of the chapters about how the sunflowers turn and face the sun, which is a
Hmm.
beautiful metaphor. Um, so, yeah, and I think that's what Oscar did. He was in his little soddy. He didn't know what he was doing. He brought a broke-legged horse and a mule. People were laughing at him. He had a plow that didn't work. And I mean, they were ridiculing him. He was the only
Hmm.
Black person in that area. And people would just really line up and watch him try to plow the earth. And finally, several people, started feeling sorry for him and kind of helped him. And but he stayed there for 7 years, lonely, dark years, and that's when he start writing his first book. And so eventually, Hollywood was starting to come into uh, fruition, and so these two Black brothers came
Yes.
from California and
And
said,
created the Lincoln motion picture.
and that's right. And
Hmm.
they were interested in Oscar's first book,
Yes.
and they wanted to produce it. And he said, why should I give you the rights to my book? I'm going to create a movie by myself. Of course, he had never done that. But he went to Sioux City and he bought himself some equipment and he started making films. And that's what he was. He was very inventive, very resilient. And I think that's a message that all of us could learn, especially people today. We're all stressed out and we don't know. It's important that we all, as be Black entrepreneurs and kind of move our journey forward that way.
Well, one thing about Oscar
So,
Micheaux that I remember reading about a lot of, and that's why his films represent that, he wanted to show how African American people were able to be successful, to be well
exactly,
educated, to do a lot more. That's what he
exactly.
was striving for himself. And that's why he left home to go with his older brother, and he took
Yes,
these jobs to save money for him to start his film company and his publishing book company too. And
exactly,
that's what made him like
exactly.
started. And that's what made me be more intrigued by him, that he wanted to break that myth that other producers like D.W. Griffith was putting out there about African
Yes,
Americans. And
yes.
that's why I admire him. But as you were gathering information about Oscar Micheaux, what were your thoughts about this man, knowing his films, his writings? Like, how did you perceive him to be?
Well, there's a duality about Oscar Micheaux.
Hmm.
The first time I wrote the book, the original publisher wanted me to only talk about the good things, make it a little, a story that was. I mean, he had good points and bad points, as all of us do. But I mean, he was successful. He became a professional, but he also had these little quirks. Let me just tell you about one of the things that he used to do. He was stingy. He didn't like to spend a lot of money. He made a lot of
He
money,
was
but he didn't like to
frugal.
lose
Yes,
a
yes.
lot of money.
Hmm.
So one of the things that he would do, he had a studio, and when he wanted to shoot a film, he would borrow other people's props. And so he would say that he was auditioning people for a film, and so these wealthy ladies would come up and try to get a part in his film. So they would come driving in with their fancy cars. He was in Harlem at that time, and
Good old
they would come
Harlem.
in with their fancy cars and their furs
Hmm.
and their jewels, thinking that they were auditioning. And while they were sitting there, Oscar would have made arrangements for one of his staff she would hang up her coat. They would take the fur coat, borrow the fur coat, take her car, and go out and shoot a scene while the person was being interviewed. So he didn't have to buy any of the expensive things. So he was clever like that. And
Very clever. He saved
yeah,
money that way.
he saved money that way. And one time he went back to Gregory to shoot one of his final films. So he had the motor car, and he went down there to the land, and people were looking in their houses, looking out to see what was going on. And he yelled across the field and said, "Get your heads back in your houses. You're ruining my scene." And they did. I mean, he was bossy. But he did what he had to do to move the thing forward. Speaking of D.W. Griffith, if your listeners don't know about that film, Birth of a Nation, it was made back in the early 1900s, and it had it depicted Klan activity. The basis of the story, Paul Robeson was in it, and they showed about the slaves having been freed during the time of Reconstruction. They had terrible scenes, black legislators in the halls of Congress with their feet up on their desk eating chicken, and the carpetbaggers were there. It showed lynchings. And the thing is, white people flocked to this film. Even the president at that time endorsed the film. And so D.W. Griffith had the latest technology. He was making money hand over fist. And so when Oscar Micheaux saw it, he said, I've got to do something about this. The Tulsa massacre had just taken place. And the black soldiers were just coming back from the war in 1919. So the cities were inflamed. The racial tensions were so high. And in the midst of all this, Oscar said, I've got to tell this story.
Hmm.
And so he created a film, and it's depicted in
Within
my
our
book.
gates. Within our
Yeah,
gates.
within
Hmm.
our gates. It starts with it's a pushback on D.W. Griffith's film
Yes,
Birth
a
of a
big pushback.
Nation.
Hmm.
Yeah, a big pushback. And so when it first appeared, the censor board at that time, you had to have certain scenes cut out, or the censor board had a lot of power to say, this is what you can and what you can't depict in these films, because you don't want to incite people. And what they were talking about was black people. We don't want to get black people up in arms. So what Oscar would do, he would make a second cut of the film, run that through the censor board, and then he would get the approval, and then he would show it in its entirety when he actually
Hmm.
went into the black uh, he did the chicken circuit down in the South. He would show those films in any kind of hall he could find, schools, uh, outside airings. He would show them in the movie theaters in Chicago, but they would show the full uncut version. And at that time, they had, the music that they were playing. There was also something called Midnight Rambles that I'm sure you know about, where the white theater owners would allow Black people to come in and view their films after all the white patrons
Hmm.
had left.
Hmm.
So they would rent out the music halls, and that's where Oscar would show his films. And once the word got out about Within Our Gates, Black people flocked to see that film. I mean, and he made a lot of money with that film. But the most important thing is that he was really a part of the whole Black uplift
Right.
movement. And so, despite some of I mean, there are some negative aspects to him. He was a misogynist. He had several wives. One of his wives he married, brought her down to his homestead without telling her. Her father was a minister, and he thought that he was a wealthy man, and so he brought her all the way down from Chicago to this little plot of land. And the reason he did it is that if you get married, you could get another 7 acres of land. So that was his. Well, it's not up to me to say if he married for love or not, but it seemed like it was a little convenient that he got another plot of land because of the marriage. That didn't work out too well. And in fact, the father snatched his daughter back, and and through some shady dealings, the father actually got control of the land. So then Micheaux brought his sister and I think it was his grandmother or his aunt down, and they got land. So there was all of this, kind of all these machinations going on where Oscar knew that land was very profitable.
Right. He did know that, to be
Yes, yes,
wealthy, and again, his main focus was to achieve wealth, to be
exactly.
successful. And like you said, there are negative aspects about Oscar Micheaux. There are negative aspects about him, but yet you have to understand this man was driven because of wealth, because where he came from too. He didn't want to
Exactly.
live like his parents lived or his siblings
Yes,
lived. He
that's
wanted to
right.
show that he could do more, and he was out of anyone in his family. He's the one that came out of the poverty really to to
Exactly.
to do better for himself. So, so your thoughts, as you were saying, as you gathered information about Oscar Micheaux, was to you, you seen the positive in him, and
Hmm.
you also saw the negative in him, but, you know, would you say that he was a well-respected filmmaker in Hollywood?
He was.
I agree, he was.
In some of his films, but as the movie industry evolved and they started getting a lot more sophisticated, Oscar just could not keep up. For example, when color films started coming out, Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, with all the technology, Oscar could not really keep up with the technology.
Couldn't
So
afford it. He couldn't afford the
he
money
couldn't
for the
afford it.
technology,
He
right?
couldn't afford it. It's really the same with independent filmmakers. And this is a good opportunity to talk about the Oscar Micheaux Film Festival in LA that happens every year. And as I said, my son Brian is a filmmaker. And Black filmmakers of color, they struggle to get their voices out. They don't often have the financing. They don't have the film crews to work with them. They don't have the marketing support. And so film festivals like the Oscar Micheaux Film Festival that happens every year in Los Angeles in July is and other Black film festivals are so needed so people can network, share the wealth, and bring it forward. So, yes, Oscar had a lot of challenges, but for what he did, he's unparalleled in his craft. During the Harlem Renaissance, he was a part of the whole Harlem Renaissance movement with the Cotton Club, Langston Hughes, the whole music industry, the
Mhm.
the poets and all of that, he wasn't taken quite as seriously as they were because, if you're a poet, if you're a member of the literati or something like that, he wanted to mix and mingle with that society, which he did, but he always was felt a little less than.
Mm.
And so, but he was in the midst of all of that. In fact, some of his films, he would go into places like the Cotton Club and film the dancers unawares. So you'll see in a lot of his films, you'll see
Yes,
the singers and the dancers.
yes,
And of
yes.
course, back then they weren't worried about getting film rights or permissions or even getting paid.
Mhm.
But if you go back and look at them, and a lot of these are available in the digital libraries, and of course on your site, Old Black Hollywood. I mean, you can see that culture, and I am so proud when I see, it's not just about Denzel Washington. Before there was Denzel Washington, there were Black actors, Black actresses, Black musicians. And when I discovered your site, I thought, I have gone to heaven. These are my people.
Yes, yes, we gotta support our people because they didn't get
Exactly.
it back then. They didn't get it back then. So
No, no.
let's give them the recognition now.
Yes.
That's why really enjoy having conversations with people like yourself who are historians, who are experts
Yes.
about the Black filmmakers, Black actors from those time and actresses.
Mhm.
I love knowing about the history of it.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but every time I feel so sad
Mhm.
because I know what they had to have gone through,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, the struggle and why they had to change their mind of thinking, like
Mhm.
Micheaux had to, in order to
Exactly.
achieve what he needed to present out there. In
Yes.
his mind, he wanted to show the world that African American people were very educated. They could be wealthy.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
when I watch his films, I love seeing how well dressed the men and women are,
Oh,
you
yes.
know and
Uh-huh.
they're driving nice cars and everything. I just loved all his movies. Now, which one of his movies are your favorites? You have a favorite of his movies?
Uh, I'm looking right now. I would have to say Within Our Gates
The silent
because
film.
I think some of his films were for entertainment, and
Yes,
that's fine. Some of them were more like soap operas. They
yes.
were some of them were comedian
Mystery, murder.
mysteries. There's all of those kinds of things, but I think Within Our Gates was the most powerful, and I think it was the most mind changing. And
It was well done too. It was well done. It
yes,
was
yes,
well
yes,
done for a
it
silent
was well
film
done.
in that
And he
era
did
with
it, he
little
did it
had
in
to
less than a
had.
year. He did it in less than a year.
Yes.
I mean, he said,
Yeah.
I have got to respond to this. And he put all of his resources together and got it out there just like this, which is a message to today's filmmakers. Now, we just came off of the writer's strike. And when I went out to LA, right in the midst of that, right after the Oscar Micheaux Film Festival, that's when the writers had gone on strike. And, the Oscar Micheaux Film Festival participants were on the picket lines. And,
Mm.
uh, so once again, as a community, as a community of filmmakers, of writers, of poets, musicians, and so forth, we need to support the arts as a group, and
We
particularly
do.
those of us of color, because the climate has not changed. Today
No.
is the last day of Banned Book Week,
Hmm.
for example. And it's funny, I talked to Cheryl Willis Hudson of Just Us Books, and I stood up in the, oh, I'll double back on that in just a minute. It may be that this book is going to be a banned book, at least in Florida and in Texas, because it does talk about uh, racism. It talks about the brutality during that time.
You have to, because
Yeah.
that was his
So
experience too. Yeah, you have to.
exactly. And I think we authors that are writing those kinds of truths, we wear that as a badge of honor. So
Hmm.
I just came back from another writers conference in Santa Fe, and we have a writers collective there. These are amazing people. Anne Lamott, who they
Hmm.
say Bird by Bird is the fifth gospel, Julia Cameron. So they were like 300 participants in Santa Fe and over 2,000 that were attending it virtually. And I was able to stand in their midst and talk about the importance of voices of color to be represented, um, not just to be, I mean, some people write for themselves for healing, personal journals or memoir, that kind of thing. But those of us who are committed to history or history of our culture, speaking our truths, it's important that we stand up firmly, band together, and go out as a united front. So I
I
created
agree.
called the Writers of Color,
Hmm.
and we support one another with these messages and help each other to be fearless to push these works out.
Hmm.
So we'll see going forward what happens
Now,
from.
before I end this interview with you, I want to get your opinion, your thoughts about Micheaux's actresses and actors who are in his film. You
Uh-huh.
know, from what I've seen, all his films, they were
Uh-huh.
all lighter complexion. So again, you see
Yes.
colorism taking
I
place around that
mean,
time.
there are a few dark-skinned actors and actresses, for
Very few
example,
on his
well, like I
films
said,
and
very
all his
few.
movies. But then again, most of his movies were destroyed. You have a
Yes,
few of his surviving films, but the
yes,
ones that I have was able to watch and see, the leading roles were lighter complexion women. And
of
for the
course.
men too, especially God's Stepchildren. If you watch that,
Lorenzo Tucker.
yes,
Yes, Lorenzo
they have
Tucker.
they have all
Uh-huh.
those that
They
kind of
call him the
look.
Black Valentino. He
Yes,
could pass. Uh-huh.
yes, yes, yes. So they had that type of look. Even Evelyn Prier, who was always the
Yes,
lead lady, and Edna Mae Harris. You have all
yes,
these
exactly.
women
Exactly.
who he had, but I did not really see any dark skinned leading role actresses or actors in his movies.
Well, I mean, to understand that, you'd have to go back and take a look at it from what was going on culturally at that time. And unfortunately, having a light complexion, having what they called the good hair at that time was the vision of beauty in the Black community. Sometimes women and men would bleach their faces to get a lighter complexion. They would wear
Back
makeup.
then, they bleached
Oh,
their skin back then.
absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely, absolutely. Madam C.J. Walker, for example, the first Black millionaire, she sold cosmetics to help with she was one of the
Right.
first that
Hmm.
did the relaxing of the hair. And there was, pancake makeup. So that was the ideal beauty at that time, and now we push back on that. Of course, we wear our locks, and we reclaim our African ancestry, but at that time, it was completely different. And so what he was trying to do was portray a vision of women that was the most uh, desirable to
Hmm.
Black men, into Black society. It was thought that if you were wealthy and intelligent, the lighter you were, the more intelligent you appeared, the better that you spoke. It was a model of this is what we should ascend to.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was a little complicated, but those were his choices. And even in places like the Cotton Club and in performances, Josephine Baker, for example, she was very light skinned. Well, you know who Josephine Baker
Yes, of
was,
course.
dancer and so forth. So
Hmm.
she was the that was the ideal beauty. If you remember films like Imitation of Life,
Yeah,
uh,
Freddie Washington.
exactly, which he did not make, but it talked about the complexities
Hmm.
of the complexion
Hmm.
at that time. And so he was just responding to what the market wanted at that time. And I think if he were born 30 years later, he might have made different choices.
Hmm.
But at that time, that was the standard. And I think that would make his films more popular and more
Hmm.
acceptable, because it was just there was a bit of self-loathing that Black people had at that time, and they had to kind of overcome that. People that were coming from the South, moving north to try to gain good jobs, to get more well educated, and so forth. So this is what they aspired to: wealth, position, education, and all of those things. And
Right.
that was the epitome of that light society that you see.
Okay. So before we end this interview, please tell my viewers, where can they find your book? When is it going to come out? Because I think this book will be great. I agree. I hope everybody will go and read it, buy your book when it comes out, because I want a lot of people to know about Oscar Micheaux, who he
Okay.
was and what he contributed to Black Hollywood. You know, he
Okay.
was the pioneer of it all. So tell us, when can we expect the book to come out, and how can we be able to purchase it once it comes out?
Okay, well, the publisher, it will be Just Us Books, JUST US Books. And you can go on their website, justusbooks.com. And I would advise people to go on that site and just cruise around. They have amazing books of all levels. They just put out, Wade Hudson just put out an amazing book called Invincible. They have quality books for children, young adults, and for all of us. I'd also like to mention my website, which
Yes,
is
please.
Michelle Y Green, without an E, Michelle, middle initial Y, last name Green, GREEN.com. And there's a place where you can, it's a contact form. If you fill that out, then when the
I
book
did. I
is
filled it
okay, I
out.
know
I
you did.
subscribed.
So when it's
Yes,
released, we can stay in touch. Um,
definitely.
at this at this point, it will be released in October 2024. But I would say, and as I said, the tentative title is Lights, because at this point, it's in the final editing phases.
Hmm.
Sometimes things, rearrange themselves, but um, go to both of those websites
You said the
and
title of the book is Lights.
lights, exclamation point, camera, exclamation point,
Hmm.
lights, camera, action, the story of Black filmmaker Oscar Micheaux. And one thing I will mention is that Micheaux has, as you know, different spellings, but he changed his name. His family name had one spelling. And when he left his family, to spite his parents, he spelled it Micheaux. And there are also several Micheaux websites that people can find. There's
Oh,
an
really?
Oscar Micheaux website. Yes. So
Now, who
cruise
owns
around.
rights to his estates? Do you know?
Excuse me?
Who owned the rights to his estates?
Well, it's a bit of a mystery because he died of congestive heart failure when he was on his way down to film a movie. And his wife was still alive, and he had his house and all of his holdings in the house. And the rumor was that when he died, for spite, she burned the house down with all of his, not, she burned out, she didn't burn the house down, she burned all of his collections of films and books. And but then another part of the myth is that the neighbors next door got all of that material and put it in their house. And so, it's one of those mysteries that makes him so fascinating.
Does he have any
So
children? Like grandchildren?
no, no,
No.
they didn't.
Mhm.
So, it's one of those ongoing mysteries. Where did all of his stuff go? Now, a lot of his films and books were distributed elsewhere. So occasionally they will find a print of one of his films. For example, they found one in Spain. They had like a foreign language edition of it. So all of his films we don't have anymore, and which is a shame.
Yeah, it is
You
a
know,
shame.
have the importance of archives at that point.
Mhm.
Didn't They didn't have the technology, it just never occurred to anyone. But a number of his books are still available. In fact, one of my former publishers gave me original copies of The Homesteader in hardback, and I keep them in my library, which is like inspiring. Yes, it is, to actually sit there with one of his first edition books and flip through it.
Wow.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's amazing. So I hope
Hold
everyone
on to
falls
it.
in love with Oscar as much as I do, and
Oh,
and
I love him.
enjoy.
I love what he
Yes,
stands for, what he did.
Uh-huh.
There's like you said, there's some negativity about him, whatever. There's some negative things,
Right.
but you know what? The positive outweighs it. What he tried to do. I love
Yeah,
the fact that he broke the myth from what Birth of a Nation was trying to show.
exactly.
So he put himself out there. He risked a lot out there for us. So
Good.
please, please, please share with us again. How can we get information about Oscar Micheaux Film Festival or festival?
The site is, let me just look it up because
Because
my
those who are
phone, I
out
turned
there
my
who are
phone
Oscar
off.
Micheaux fans who really like
I
Oscar
think it's
Micheaux,
OM.
they'll probably want to
Yeah,
go.
you can
Yeah.
look. I think it's OM dot. I don't have my phone on at this point, but
Okay.
take a look for it. It's om.festival.com, I think it is.
All
But if
right.
you Google search for the Oscar Micheaux Film
All
Festival,
right. Google
Los
search that. Mhm.
Angeles. Yes,
Yes.
that's the best way to do it. I was trying to look on my phone, but I turned it off.
Because we know
But
we have a lot of Oscar
it
Micheaux
is
fans
it
out
is
there.
yeah, it's a week-long gathering. And
Oh, it's in LA? Never in
in
New York?
LA. No, it's in Los Angeles. It's in Hollywood, baby. And people come from all over the world. So, for example, we flew out there. It's in LA, so my son and I flew out there, and you register the first day, but they actually
Mm-hmm.
have screenings of independent films right off the gate, and then they have red carpet events so that you can get all fancy and have your pictures taken, and individual screenings, and then they have fun events like they had a midnight ramble bowling party,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, and then they have Oscar Micheaux awards, and then they have a lot of celebrities attend so that you can hobnob with the celebrities there. They have panels and workshops.
So it's every
And
year in July.
every year in July, it's like the third week in July, I think. And
Well, I think I'm gonna fly out to LA next year. God's
Regal,
blessing.
it's at the Regal Cinema.
Regal Cinema.
Regal Cinema is where it's held.
I think I'll check out LA next year.
I hope to see you there.
I will be
We can
there.
hang
'Cause I,
out.
yes, we could definitely, definitely, definitely. And of course, even before then, hopefully we'll still communicate and,
Oh,
and,
we
and share
will.
with
We
each
will.
other. I really, like I said, thank you so much for being on the show. I love having an opportunity to speak with experts like yourself and who's out there writing and letting the world know who the Oscar Micheaux was and others too.
Yes.
It's really good to be a historian and to educate and share the new generation because people today don't really know who he was and what he has done
That's my
or what he
mission.
did.
That's what I do.
So thank you so much for that.
Thank
And
you, Claire.
and reading your manuscript, was thanks to you. Your son learned about Oscar Micheaux, right?
He did.
So he learned from you. So again, thank you so much. I know you have other obligations today, and we definitely will talk again. All
Okay.
right. And do me a favor, just inbox me your home address because I like to send you a gift. All right, from
Oh,
Old Black
really?
Hollywood. Yes, 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 yes.
Nice.
So
Thank
send me
you.
your address and everything. Make sure it's correct so you get it. All right. So I'm
I
gonna order
will.
it for you and you get it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Claire. All
Thank
right.
no, thank you for your time.
Thank
All
you,
right. Enjoy.
everyone. Okay, my
Okay.
pleasure.
Enjoy your day.
All right.